I've known this guy over 10 years. Okay, while I was a social worker in San Francisco for 28, and also working for Randy Shaw at the Tenderloin Housing Clinic. And Jon excited me from the first moment I saw him speaking at various meetings, and all his homeboys is in the mission. Okay, he hangs out a lot. Okay, and he goes a lot of places, but I found out his integrity and his honesty is true. And he was able to get a lot of people to do a lot of wonderful things in San Francisco. And that's what I followed him ever since then. And I wanted him to come here tonight to talk to us and explain a few things, but hear your voices as well. Because he's done a lot of activism in San Francisco that's brought a lot of people out in their communities. And so tonight, I want him to enrich our community with his knowledge, okay, and all the stuff that he brings with him. So now I give you Ron.
Hey!
I'm Jon.
Ron, that's kind of a nice ring to it.
Okay. All right.
So I would like to thank you guys for actually being here today, and Harold and Molly for inviting me and having me come out. It was a bit of a drive, but it was well worth it. You guys have much better weather. I'm leaving the fog. You guys have like 90 degrees. I have a coat. I don't even need it. Out here, getting out of the car, you just feel it's like a sauna. But so thank you guys for having me. I really do appreciate it. Kind of, I guess, a little bit of background for me. I got involved maybe about 8 years ago, or 10 actually.
Yes, it was 10.
I was a young pup then. I'm just a little bit of an older pup now. And when I got involved, I really wasn't sure what it is I wanted to tap into. I just knew that the problems of my community had directly impacted me. So I'm born and raised in the San Francisco Mission District. I'm the child of 2 immigrants who were illegal immigrants who did the trek from El Salvador through Mexico, through the border illegally like everybody else has done, and came right here to the San Francisco Mission District. My parents were escaping a bloody civil war at the time, and my mother was in university, so was my father. They were both in school, and they had to leave their last year of college because it was that or possibly not making it past that. And so when they came here, they came straight to work. My mom cleaned houses for 25 years until she passed away. My dad was a musician at 14 and is a musician at 64. He's still doing that. But for me, I became a product of my immediate environment. For us in these communities that we grow up in that are often disinvested and forgotten, we tend to have a lot of things that are not good for us. We have gang influences, we have drug influences and drug abuse, we have a lack of opportunity, a lack of education, and you absorb it. And so for me, when I was really young, I never really felt I belonged in school. I often felt I didn't understand what I was even learning. And so for me, where I felt I can get a sense of dignity and self-respect was with the people that were outside the counterculture, where they could kind of take that dignity and self-respect. And so you gravitate to it. And to be completely frank and transparent, I'm very transparent about kind of my journey, that's exactly what I did. Dropped out of high school by 14, by 15, 16, was living the juvenile delinquent life, was on probation, was just living a complete counter life to where I am today. And I always say that because people that meet me as an adult would never imagine that was me as a child. And people that knew me growing up never believed that I am doing what I'm doing now. It's like 2 separate worlds, but they're the same. And so my involvement really became when I went to college. I ended up getting my GED, I ended up getting a job. The job taught me a lot of skills that obviously were hard skills that can kind of get me through things. And so when I went back to school, I really started analyzing how it is I developed the worldview that I developed. And there was this point in time where I realized that everything that kind of happened because of people in power. People that get elected to office, people that make decisions. They redline us into particular neighborhoods, and we grow up in those neighborhoods. The Iran-Contra scandal blows the lid off this whole kind of illicit drug trade and arms sales. And you kind of start putting all these things together, and you're like, well, it's not because we're inadequate. It's not because we're dumb. It's because it's very intentional. And so I quickly kind of gravitated towards politics. And I saw that as the avenue to create change, more so the ballot box. And you know, I started, like many people do, I connected with an old friend that I saw was doing stuff, and I'm like, yo, I don't know what you're doing, but can I come along? I went to a San Francisco Latino Democratic Club meeting, and I met some incredibly fiery organizers that I, you know, never even knew who they were, they didn't know who I was. We were in the same radius, and we were in complete different worlds. And so, you know, you start gravitating with these people, they're talking about all these crazy concepts and ideas, and I kind of just ran with it. And everything has kind of been one thing leading to the other and building on top of itself. And so to kind of fast forward, or else we'll be here for another 3 hours, you know, I started Vota Ya, which is the voter registration organization, in 2015. I worked on a bunch of different campaigns for San Francisco, and eventually was hired on to be a legislative aide for Supervisor Jane Kim, who we tried to get to be mayor, did not succeed. And now, because of my random journey, I work in land use and affordable housing at a nonprofit developer, close friend of Randy Shaw's, in San Francisco, Soma district. And so that's kind of the nutshell story, a little background and context. You know, I'm happy to answer any other questions, but really why I'm here is to try to have a conversation, not just around voter registration, but really kind of what are the issues of the neighborhood and what it is you're trying to accomplish, what it is that you want to do. And I'm sure that our issues are not that different, even if we're a little bit further away.
Questions? Questions from the audience?
Yeah, I see it as inevitable, but for some reason, the Concord community, which is a significant percentage is Latino, probably half the kids that graduated high school from this area, well, maybe 60% were of color, including Latinos. We're just not seeing people like you emerge.
Yeah.
And is it cultural? Is it just because they haven't arrived yet?
That's a good question. So I just took a quick glance because I was trying to look at kind of Concord's just demographics in general. 21% of people in Concord are Latino, of Latino background. And so the question as to kind of where they are is really a self-reflecting question for the Latino community. And I think it's also a self-reflecting question of those people that are in power currently. It has to be a two-way street. On the one hand, within our community, it's difficult to understand and unravel politics when we are dealing with economic issues that have us prioritizing paying monthly bills and raising our kids than dabbling in the world of politics. And so on the one hand, you have this kind of economic imbalance with a secondary layer of our parents not being from this country a lot of times and not truly understanding what it all means. I know in my household, there was a lot of just kind of, you don't really know. You know people vote, but you don't really understand why. And so on the one hand, I think that it's incumbent on those of us that have acquired some privilege to come back and try to decipher that and help with that. And that's kind of the thinking behind the voter program that I started in 2015. But then simultaneously, we have to partner with our white progressive allies that have had the benefit of understanding the political system, understanding the political game. And it has to be almost this kind of hand-in-hand marriage where we have the similar ideals and values and we work collectively to empower those people of color. And I know that Concord has district elections, right? And so District 3, I believe, is where the heavy concentration of and so, for me, if I was in Concord, it's, and I don't know, maybe this exists, but it's about kind of starting these institutions where I've referred to people at the Latino Democratic Club, right? That had been around, I want to say 27 years before I walked through the door. But it allowed me a place and a space for me to get involved in democratic politics and begin to decipher what it all meant to begin with. So I don't know if that directly answers it, but it takes a lot of work on both sides.
Anyone else?
But it just seems to me it's an individual, somebody, it's going to be, I just don't get it. There's so many kids graduating from high school, going to school. They are bilingual, bicultural. Why aren't they activists?
You know, the other thing is, to be frank, is politics is not that sexy. I mean, politics has kind of acquired this negative connotation where a lot of people don't really want to get involved. I mean, to be frank, a lot of people that I grew up with are not the same people that I organize with. It's a different set of people. And the people that I grew up with just see that I do stuff, they don't know what it is, but they're like, yo, we'll support you, that's cool. And so for me, it really is a struggle and try to like understand how I can like, how can we break this down for you to understand how valuable it is for you to participate. It is a challenge.
Can you talk in a little more detail about how you know, at what age, through what influences you started getting into politics? What turned those wheels in your mind?
I think, I've always kind of reflected on that same question. I think it's a culmination of hearing about repressive governments back home from my parents, always kind of made me think of things on a global like context about politics, and thinking about how the US maybe had played a role in some of the conflicts in Latin America. So those, I would say that early on in my mind, that's kind of what started. I was like, all right, well, there's a connection there. And I think well, the other thing too, actually, was my mother cleaned houses, as I mentioned, and when I was a kid, she used to clean one of the state senators' houses. So I used to go there when I was a kid, and you know, we used to like go into this house, and the guy was a Republican, and I didn't really know what the hell the difference was. She just would bring home this literature, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, you know, I got his little picture on it and his little name on it, and so, you know, that was kind of like my first, I guess you could say, introduction. And my mother started following that kind of, like, just because it was her client. And then as I got older, it wasn't until I got to college that I started kind of unraveling. I looked at sociology as a major first, then I looked at philosophy, and then I kind of stumbled into politics and saw, okay, well, wait a minute, this is where it kind of happens. Like, sociology is definitely the study of movements, philosophy is the theoretical cool stuff, but then it was the politics that I was like, it's at the ballot box that things change.
What is it though that made you, I mean, do you think, can you see in your, even in your childhood characteristics in you that made you even interested in the question to understand how things work, where power is?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I was always a curious kid. I was a kid that like broke things and then tried to put it back together. I was always just kind of how I was. And I always like to push the envelope and kind of be out there, but not anything as a child that I thought, you know, I like politics. It wasn't until I was about maybe 19, 20.
John?
Yeah.
What are the best ways to get started and build momentum in voter participation work? And please ground us in the reality about opportunities, obstacles, and some examples from your experience in San Francisco and elsewhere.
I think the number one thing, to be quite honest, is just starting and doing. There was a lot of frustration for me with a lot of the voter registration stuff, because in groups we often talked about what we should be doing and how we should do it and when we should do it, and I would get frustrated because we would just never do it. I'd be like, okay, well, like, we've talked about it, we have this entire thing of how we're going to do it, but we're not doing anything. And so I literally was just like, all right, I'm going to call the Department of Elections, got trained on how to register people, picked up a stack of things, and at the next event we had similar to this, had them at the door. And I was like, all right, who's not registered? Have you moved recently? Should we re-register you? And that's kind of the slow build to then, from there, people are like, oh wow, he's doing that. We should also do that. And it's really starting to just doing and understanding what you're doing and having kind of a plan, but the first thing is just to do it. And you know, the other question I think is the obstacles of it. Like, I think I've alluded to this, politics is and voting is just not sexy. It's not the most attractive thing. And some of the low-hanging fruit is community events like this, festivals, markets. But when you're there, you're also encountering people that are either at a festival having fun, at the market buying groceries, or they're busy. And the last thing they really want to do is interact with you, some random person, and a form that you got to register them to vote. They're like, why? You know, I'm trying to have a good time. You're killing my buzz, whatever it is. You know, and so it's difficult to try to connect with people. And one of the pieces of advice that I give and that we try to do is create a small one-page little postcard-sized thing of why you vote, why I vote, and have the voter reg forms already highlighted, ready to roll. And unfortunately, dramatization of things, kind of things that pop, get people's attention, and in those circumstances is kind of one of the things that you could do. But it's not easy. You'll be out there for a few hours and you'll feel proud when you register 5 people.
I wanted to make a comment.
Yeah.
So Kennedy ran in District 3. He was one of the, he came in second, and I ran for school board, and I came in first runner-up. But what you said is exactly it. Nobody wants me to follow. I'm at the market, I wanna tell them what I wanna do, and like, who are you and why should I care? I don't know if you felt similar going door to door. I had that, like, don't bother me, I'm having dinner. But if you're not having dinner, you're at work and I can't find you, so I need to bother you at dinner. Just like, go to the
You're trying to save before I call the cops.
So, what did you do specifically
Yeah.
to convince people, you said, talking about doing it?
Yeah.
What's the it? What did, you met with all these groups,
Yeah.
you frustrated here, you frustrated there. What has worked for you?
Yeah.
Take it all the way down from high school to college age people, young people.
Yeah.
What convinces them to at least sit at a table for 2 hours to register people or to get registered? What did you do?
So the specific organization, Vota Ya, is what we'll kind of, I guess, talk about to make that easy. Of 30 people that were in the room talking about what they wanted to do, we walked away with 2 others that were down, like committed. They're like, let's do this, let's see it through. And of those 2 people, we, after we did our first voter drive, we did it in South San Francisco over at a Starbucks where there was a heavy concentration of Latino elders that I just would see when I would walk over there. And so that was our first thing. We had a little high off that. We're like, man, that was great. We registered 4 people. That was amazing. All right. Then we met, we sat down, and we started scheming. Okay, well, what does this look like long term, right? And this is where we begin to plan. But it all started with picking up the voter forms and just getting out there and doing it. Then we sat down and started scheming. All right, well, what would we need to do? How would we lay this out? And so we developed a plan and a goal. This was also simultaneously as Trump was emerging as the lead candidate, which inspired a lot of people to want to get involved. And what we started realizing was like, okay, well, obviously we're under attack. They're calling Mexicans racist and rapists, rapists and drug dealers and all this. So we then started to try to scheme how we can impact the 2016 election. We started thinking of positions that we might need, and then we started looking for grants to fund us. And so I happened to write one grant that did get us funding, and for the 2015 cycle, I was able to hire 2 organizers, one in San Mateo, one in San Francisco. And then that made it a lot easier in that you have one person whose sole job it is to get out there and recruit volunteers and register voters. And so, in that cycle, I think in San Mateo and San Francisco combined, we registered about 1,600 people. And it was, that was a huge impact, I felt. And the second part to this is it's not just about registering, it's about creating a list of people that are in your contact network. So it's not enough for me to just register you. I have to then be able to contact you to remind you to vote. Because registration without participation is nothing. It's like you shouldn't have done it anyway. And so the people that were comfortable, we kept their information, and that week close to election day, we just went on the phones, emails, and sent a piece of mail out to be able to remind them to vote, right? And so that's just kind of how we started. It was a small group, but you just set up your dates. We picked, at first when we had no funding, we picked a Saturday, then a Wednesday. And we picked specific areas to target, and we would just sit out there and try to talk with people. And then we realized it didn't work that well. That's when we created the literature. That's a lot easier. When you have something you can just hand someone that they just kind of look at for 2 seconds, it sometimes catches enough attention to say, yeah, maybe I should register.
When it comes to getting that organization, have you found that Latino business owners are is a better source to creating those organizations, that organizing, since they have businesses, since they have the community coming to their business, versus going door to door?
We did both. So we sat out in front of the Chavez Market all the way in Redwood City, and that is where we would get a boatload of people that would just walk by us. And the guy that we hired that literally would just sit there for 4 hours and talk to the people coming in and out of the market. And what he said is the first day that they would see him, wouldn't really talk to him. But after he was there repeatedly, people would eventually kind of let their guard down and like, all right, what's this guy want? And so we did definitely use that approach. We did it at Mexican produce stores. We kind of tried to pick locations where the population is concentrated. It's like critical mass. But we also did the door-to-door thing too, and just kind of tried to say, hey, did you just move here? Do you need to register?
Back there, the lady right there in the green. Yes.
Me, oh, me, okay, thank you. Couple things. Were there issues that ignited or motivated people to vote? Many times people look at voting and say, that's out there, I don't understand all of that. What is it that's pertinent to me, number one? And number two, how did you, I know when I did some phone banking and I was talking to people about voting, they would say, can you help me with the propositions, which I couldn't, right? But they wanted to have information on what is this? This is really a lot of stuff for me to take in. Did you address that?
Mhm. So the second part of your question, San Francisco has a really cool thing called the League of Pissed Off Voters. I don't know if you guys I'll tell you, so the same reaction in this room would be the reaction I get when I'm out somewhere saying, hey, League of Pissed Off Voters. People give you that reaction. And they do a comprehensive guide on each ballot measure and state initiative that they've endorsed. And so I could literally just refer them to that or give them that. And so that was a very vital tool. And then the second thing was, the first thing, was Trump. To be sincere, it was the easiest thing for us, and I think was the biggest motivating factor, in that you have somebody with a full frontal attack just coming straight for him. And so for us, we were able to put it on literature, we were able to talk about it, and it made the conversation a lot easier. And I would argue that that is still very relevant today. I think that the kids in the cages, I think that what's happening at the border is a very moving issue, where a lot of people have reached out to me that are not involved with anything, and they're like, how do I get involved, what do I do? So there's definitely some inertia off that we were able to build off of.
Yeah, the lady in the
How was your, do you have any experience working in swap meets, and how is that? And also, what is your outreach with college students?
Swap meets, we have, it's called La Pulguita. It used to not really have an official name, but we definitely try to do some outreach there. It, for whatever reason, didn't really work. And there's also kind of a smaller swap meet on 24th Street that happens on Saturdays, and we try to sit out there for a while. And it didn't work for us. But I've always wanted to go to like the San Jose flea market, the big one. And there's one in Oakland. It was just kind of out of the bounds of what we were looking at, but I was like, damn, that would be so cool, because I don't know, it's a cool place to be. And your second question with colleges, we didn't do it directly with Vota Ya, and we really did want to. Some of the Democratic clubs took care of that for their voter registration drive, but having somebody that goes to the school would make it a lot easier to register.
Okay, so another question.
Sure.
So when you're registering voters, do you put your stamp on the voter registration, because that's how many clubs make a little bit of money, is by registering voters?
That we did not do, because we were not operating through the Democratic Party. So typically, Democratic clubs, or the DCCC, the Democratic County Central Committee, can take monies and kind of get that awarded. We opted not to do it just because we had grant funding, and really our goal was just to get it done.
Okay,
Who was granting you the money?
He actually just announced that he's going to run for president, Tom Steyer. Yeah, Tom Steyer was gracious enough to give us a very large grant. And something that I kind of looked at earlier, I was like, all right, well, this money's not going to last forever. So what I tried to do was parlay my money with nonprofits that were also trying to do voter registration, which is the second layer that we can talk about.
Okay. The next question is, what do you think? Oh, somebody else?
Just a quick question.
Yes.
So you talked about a little bit about 2016 Trump and how a lot of his anti-Latinx rhetoric sparked, maybe that was used as a voter engagement technique. Do you think that an alternate voter engagement strategy or another voter engagement strategy could be encouraging or pointing to members of the Latinx community who have sought, who have ran for office, who are currently in office? Because I know that it's really compelling when you see people in spaces that you see people in spaces who look like you, but you wouldn't necessarily expect yourself to be in those spaces.
Yeah, I think that could also be a very effective tool. You know, I really don't have a way to quantify which one is better, but I will say that personal experience, when I first got involved, like with politics in general, our school took us up to Sacramento. I'd never been in the Capitol. And one of the first people I ever saw was Kevin DeLeon, who, you know, think whatever you want of him, but I was like, yo, this guy's mom was a house cleaner too, and he grew up in East LA, this is crazy. Like, I felt I could connect to that, and it gives you a sense of like, well, I mean, if he can do it, I can do it, shoot, why not? So I think that using people like AOC, who's a lightning rod today, and is an incredibly inspirational figure, can definitely be effective too.
Okay, next question. What issues do you think are the most important to voters and potential voters for the 2020 overall? And what are the ones that are most relevant to Bay Area voters?
I think overall, I'd be remiss not to say the presidency. I think that would be the number one thing that is probably the biggest motivating factor for a lot of voters in general. You know, we'll see what the results are, but I think that that's one of the biggest ones. The second one that's not as focused on is also the Senate, though. You know, you have to also flip the Senate if we take the presidency. And we need about 3 seats to do that at this point, and I think there's about 34 seats that are up. So there should be at least as much importance in Senate seats as there is in the presidential race. And then locally, you know, it's hard to say, but the affordability crisis, housing, you know, anything related to rents, I think has been an incredibly difficult challenge. I know that Prop 10, which was the rent stabilization or rent control measure, failed last go around. I think that Michael Weinstein, think what you want of him, has put something up that's been revised that they're trying to get on the ballot for 2020. That might be something that'll be big. But I think things around affordability for your everyday person is gonna be the biggest kind of interest. And possibly local elected officials for city councils, school boards, board of supervisors that are talking about these issues might be big things that people should focus on in the Bay Area.
Oh, back there, Joe. Oh, Lisa.
Yeah.
Since Neto is technically nonpartisan, even though probably most of us are on the left, but what we've struggled with is finding ways to engage with people on the right. And I don't know whether your Vota Ya is technically nonpartisan or more Democrat, but did you have any experience with engaging other people in a positive way? So that, because that's a struggle for us, because we want to engage them, but.
So, coming from San Francisco, it's very hard. Everybody is a shade of blue. You know, we and literally everybody's a Democrat, all right? And it's really hard to distinguish who's who. We usually have this progressive moderate thing, but
There's more red in Concord, I'll tell you that.
I know some of them mean a state. You know,
Yeah, they do.
It's pretty nuts.
At least 2 to 1.
But not directly working with people of the Republican Party. You know, I always tell the story of when we got into this voter registration thing. The first place we hit was Cap Street, right in the Mission District. And I'm like, you know what? We're going ground zero. We're gonna get out here. We're gonna do it. I had been out there for like an hour and a half. Finally, I get a guy that wants to talk to me. I'm like, yes. You know, I'm talking to this guy. I'm like, man, you want to register? He's like, yeah. You know what? I should register. And I'm like, this is amazing. You know, we're talking about politics. We're going back and forth. And I'm like, all right, cool, man. Like, you know, he's filling out his whole form, and he gets to the bottom, and I noticed that he clicked Republican. And I almost finished. I'm like, oh, did you mean to? He's like, oh yeah, no. He's like, I want to vote for Trump. That's who the first guy I registered was. Latino Republican with the name Fidel. It was outrageous. It was outrageous. But it was one of those moments where, you know, I stopped to myself and thought, we're not monolithic. Even within the Latino community, there are people that are not all the way left, or even Democrats. There are people that are on all sides of the spectrum. And so, you know, not directly haven't had the chance to, but it was a good moment for me to reflect and think about how you do deal with that when you come across with it. And, you know, I just think that we've gotten into this era of politics where it's so divisive, and you're either here or you're there or you're nowhere. And I think that has become the biggest problem that democracy is facing, that we can't see past the rhetoric of CNN and Fox News and just understand these common issues. And how we do that is a good question, but I think being mindful that there are differences and trying to be as respectful as one can with those that are not in agreement of us, I think is the most important thing that we can do.
Anybody else?
No, he has.
Quick question.
Sure.
So, how do you approach voters? Well, they're not really voters; they haven't registered yet. But people who say that my vote doesn't matter because I'm in California, whether it's because of partisan distribution or like the electoral system? Do you get them to focus on local elections? How do you encourage them to still want to register?
I always get them to focus on local.
Okay.
I try to tackle the broader kind of electoral college and those things way more complex, and that's a debate that we can have at some point. But for me, I remind them that there was a judge's race in San Francisco that was won by 33 votes. I remind them that one of the Board of Supervisors was won by just shy of 600 votes. And I also remind them that if your vote didn't matter, these public interest groups and interest groups in general wouldn't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars to convince voters. Those are always kind of my 3 quick pitches where I'm like, you may think it doesn't, but there's people that spend money that clearly think it does.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back, George?
Yeah, I think the 2020 census is coming, and we'll see how Concord turns out. But I think it's going to be at least 35% Latino as far as residents. Identity politics. It seems like as you become a plurality, comes responsibility. And for some reason, Latino community does not seem to want to take that, at least at this stage of the game. How do you crack that?
That's a difficult nut to crack. Again, it's just such a multi-layered problem, you know, and I touched on it earlier, kind of just with the lack of investment in the community a lot of time, a history of non-participation, a history of feelings of exclusion, plus coming from a different country where the governing system was maybe corrupt and having a view that government's corrupt anyway. And you know, how you overcome that is a very difficult question.
But is this where identity politics comes in?
What do you mean?
How do you
People vote are attracted to people like themselves. So Latino candidates will be better at recruiting, getting people to vote, register to vote and to vote in the Latino community because people identify with the candidate. Identity politics.
And your question is?
Is that a factor in also taking on the responsibility for being the plurality and the emerging majority?
I'm not.
Because you got to run the place, and who wants to run the place, you know? But if you're approaching the majority, you're going to be in charge if you choose to. But how do you know? There seems to be this avoidance of wanting that responsibility.
I don't know if it's avoidance more than it is being a history of disadvantage, disinvestment. I don't think that it's they're just kind of like, I don't really want to do this, it's not really my thing. I think that there has, like I've stated, there's been a legacy of problems that have really taken over for a community, and to now expect them, just because they're the majority the most, to come and step to this plate is a big expectation of a community that doesn't have a history of that. And so this is where we as Latinos, I think we all have to step up and do our own thing, but it also comes in partnership with the people that have historically held power and hoarded power. And trying to diversify that field is definitely important. But how exactly you do it is, I don't have the magic formula for it.
Okay,